Hey everybody, Jamie Starr here for the New World News Network. Today I want to talk about the left and not in a, owned, wrecked, whatever sort of sense. If anything, I think we could say this is me trying to reason with them. So, there are a handful of people on the left that I have a lot of respect for. I for some reason, enjoy their content. And I'll name three specific people: Jimmy Dore, who I think is great; the Vanguard, who I did the one video criticizing the one guy from the Vanguard because Jimmy Dore had on the one guy and the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, he had his panties in a bunch about, and I just basically said, like, this is like going to someone and being like, well, here's a make or break question as to what I can do with you, how much I can interact with you, whether I should even talk to you or not. OJ Simpson, guilty or innocent? And it's like, what? Who the fuck cares? Like, when I was growing up, in the OJ trial was like the thing. First off, even the people who were happy that he got off thought he was guilty, so that was like a whatever. But it's like, no, like, politics did not interfere in people's day-to-day lives in such a manner where there were these checklist issues of, well, if you don't agree with me on Kyle Rittenhouse, well then, fuck everything else. And one of the points that Magnus guy, I've seen him make on Dave Smith's podcast, is he said, listen, if we're holding an event and say it's an anti-war rally and Hebrew Israelites, neo Nazis, Antifa, and Black Lives Matter all show up with the Christian right, and all of them come to say, well, we're just here because we're anti war. Great! Great! Everyone's here for the same reason. Let's come together. Let's get this done. And the fact that, the Hebrew Israelites think they're the real Jews and the neo-Nazis don't like Black Lives, that shit can all be set for another day. That can be worried about on another day. And people don't realize that it's this exact mindset why nothing will get accomplished. So, my real beef with this sort of contingency of the left, and it's real funny because they're the ones who are the people holding the left's feet to the fire, and they would say everything the left is doing is bad and backfiring on the people. And then in the same breath they'll say, but the solution to this would be having these exact same people do everything further, farther, faster, and just take it to the insanest degree you could imagine, and that's what they're lobbying for. Like, the thing that like bothers me is, like, these are bright people. Jimmy Dore had enough sense to have Max Kaiser on. Max Kaiser spends his time explaining to him, well, $15 minimum wage isn't really going to do shit when your currency is garbage in the first place. So what difference would it make? The dollar is doomed anyway. So you have more of them today than you had yesterday. Well, in the future you're going to have a lot more than that because it's not going to be worth anything. And sure enough, 2 days later, Jimmy Dore is still saying $15 minimum wage. $15 minimum wage hasn't helped California's problems. It hasn't helped New York City's problems. So my problem with these people is when new information presents itself, they don't update. They have their list of, we want this because it's from a moral standpoint. It's not a reasonable standpoint. So I'm just going to rattle off a handful of full of things. Here's a simple one. So the Vanguard would go out there and, you know, they will stick up for Jimmy Dore when he's called a conspiracy theorist by certain media outlets in regards to the Syrian gas weapons thing. Um, The same groups will all say we can't have health care for this, and we can't have $15 minimum wage. We need more war, and like the same media places will push every message that the vanguard is against. But then on the day that they come out and they say, well, Tucker Carlson is a covert white supremacist, whatever, whatever, they go and they're like, yeah, Tucker Carlson's covert white supremacy. Let me repeat the mainstream media talking points in the same breath that I bash the mainstream media. That's the insanity of it. Brianna Joy Gray, I saw a video. Here's the funny thing is I went on the Vanguard's page when they had Richard Wolff on. Richard Wolff, who for some reason is like, what, the only Marxist economics professor in the nation? Like, is there a reason he is just the guy? I mean, he is to economics what Anthony Fauci is to virology, basically. Where apparently he is the expert, the only expert, and there's no differing opinions. So I go on their comments and I say, this is so cute because you guys are sitting here trying to take a... Okay, let me put it the way I put it in that timeline thread to add some context to this. When people come up with this whole, 400 years of oppression, black people chained, slavery, and this and that, like, they don't realize how insane they sound because the lifestyle of the 1980s has no bearing on today. Within 20 years, the lifestyle, the norms, how everything functioned, how it all operated, has no bearing whatsoever on now. So to think you can say 400 years ago has some impact on today is patently insane. I remember the world without the internet. I now live in a world with the internet. So them with their health care is a human right, $15 minimum, why aren't you lobbying for universal dial-up internet access while you're at it? Like, that's the problem. You are taking like 100-year-old ideology of Marxism that didn't even work during the Industrial Revolution, and then thinking it can work in a technological revolution because we need workers' rights in a day and age when you don't need workers. Good job, guys. I mean, that's the real problem, is that nothing they say has any bearing whatsoever on today. They are great at pointing out the problems. People aren't getting by. People don't have enough money. But that's another thing. Like, the very fact that you can be saying, oh, all these people are suffering, all these people are suffering, all these people are suffering, and you think we're all going to sign on to safety nets to take care of the open borders, influx. I mean, none of it can work with one another. That's the main problem. They want a culture like Norway, Finland, Sweden, very culture-centric, white, European, quasi-socialist states. They're really capitalist with big safety nets. And then they want to not acknowledge the vast differences between America and here, like healthcare wise, obesity. First off, obesity, they don't have it, we do. So to think we can just import their health system over is insane, but okay. But then these same people that will want these systems that are dependent on tightly interlinked, bonded communities, shared values, will be the same people to be like, well, we need diversity. Because obviously I don't know, what's the topic of the day? Let's say the Palestinian immigrants don't want to be taxed to take care of the Hasidic Jewish neighbors, basically. I mean, and you can just extrapolate that out into anything else. I mean, I worked at a laundromat, and apparently everyone from South America hates fucking Mexicans because they're all sick of being mistaken for them. So, just so you know, the diversity coalition isn't what you think it is. I mean, blacks aren't too friendly with the gays. If you want to know why there's a trans violence issue, I mean, that's all there is to it. You can look in at the stats. I mean, it's so again, you have Richard Wolff and the Vanguard and all of these other people entertaining these 100-year-old ideas that didn't work for the past 100 years, and now it's a completely different society, And somehow they think they can extrapolate these outdated ideas into modern society. And if I had to guess, I would say most of these people are atheists who probably scoff at religion and think, what do these ancient texts have any bearing on the modern day and age? And it's like, okay, well, you can think that, but then why do you think this Marxism nonsense has any bearing on this day and age? Like, Dave Smith summed it up perfectly on a Tim Pool podcast where he was talking about, what if the employees of Blockbuster had a say over Netflix? Do you think Netflix would have ever been? No, because you put all of them out of work. So if the employees are controlling the means of production or whatever, I mean, put that into any area you want. If it's in truck driving, okay, well then driverless trucks, we can't have them because we have to keep people employed. Employment is the highest. I mean, and that's the craziness of it, is that we're going to rescue people from the indentured servitude of the capitalist system by making your employment the central part of. I mean, this is why in Russia they're digging holes just to give people work to do, because your work output is your only value. Here's another one I'll throw into this batch for good measure, even though it's a different thing completely. Fontano from the Needle Drop did an interview with Porter Robinson. And Porter was talking about how he basically got up in his own head about the success of Worlds and not feeling like he could follow it up and putting too much pressure on himself and everything like that. So anytime Porter would talk about him psyching himself out work-wise and his expectations for his work and success and things like that, Fantano, whatever this guy's name is, would take a jab at capitalism. He'd be like, well, that's a byproduct of our capitalist society and this and that. Okay, but you know what else is too? The fact that at 16, people recognized how talented he was, and they said, you're wasting your time in school, why don't you come to Germany and DJ? I mean, have you ever seen any, like, breakout pop stars from communist countries? I mean, why is K-pop all coming from South Korea and not North Korea? Like, people don't ask these questions, and they will look at everything through a negative perspective while also listing off all of these positive benefits of, and for some reason they don't think the positive benefits are tied to the same thing they're attributing all the negative ones to. They just seem to think the positive ones are a given. Like, they seem to think in a socialist society, we would say, okay, 16-year-old that happens to be very good at music, why don't you pursue music instead of school? And that's not how it works. Not unless the Chinese have decided you're going to be an Olympic gymnast from the age of 6 onward, and they've just bred you and raised you for that. No. The idea of you figuring things out and finding something you're really good at and then being able to pursue it, that's the capitalism part. Like, I tell people this all the time. Capitalism in its most basic form, and I would essentially bring this up with the gay wedding cake issue. I'm a DJ. If you book me to DJ an event, I will say yes or no. If I tell you no, you're not entitled to an explanation. That's how it works. It's that simple. Hey, Jamie, do you want a gig on June whatever? I gotta check my thing. What's the details? Oh, it's from this time to that time. It's whatever. No, I don't feel like it. Okay, I can recommend another DJ if you want. Like, I mean, this idea that you're entitled to an explanation as to why someone doesn't want your money, fuck out of here with that. So here's the other issue. And this is again why these people are the biggest pawns of the globalists. I see Brianna Joy Gray, and I don't want any of this to be interpreted as me digging at or attacking these people. I'm strictly going after their ideas, because frankly, I think Gavin from Vanguard seems like a really cool guy. I think Brianna Joy Gray seems like a sweetheart whose intentions are in the right place. I think Jimmy Dore is insanely wise, funny. So nothing I'm saying is attacking them. It's just this idea, this set of ideas that they have adopted that I see them as useful idiots for very, very bad people. So here's a good example of that. Brianna Joy Gray, and I will say, I didn't even watch the podcast because here's the other problem with these people. When you know one of their positions on something, you then know every position. Like Israel-Palestine. I know just because these people want healthcare for all what their position is on Israel-Palestine. I know what their position is on abortion. I don't need to be told it. I know it. And you know how I'm so certain that I know it? Because of how Gavin responds to someone with having an opinion about Kyle Rittenhouse. If you're constantly in this, oh, well, if you hold this opinion, I need to not communicate with you, or I need to push back on you, or I need to... Okay, so I know every opinion you have on everything, because I know what the PC opinions are. So if all of your opinions are set by corporate America, and meanwhile you're the socialist revolution overthrowing... I mean, insane. But Brianna Joy Gray had a podcast about, is it right to have children? First off, what a first world question that is. We want to talk about privilege. I mean, it's a privilege to be able to ask that question because in most normal places, people have to have children because they depend on these future generations. I mean, and this is the even insaner thing, is in America at one point, people did acknowledge if we're going to have these social safety nets, we need the future generations to pay into them. So it's really off that the people lobbying to extend these social safety nets are then saying, should I not have children for the earth? Oh, and the same people pushing all this, we need less people because of all the resources, you know, like Bill Gates going up on stages with his cute little sweaters and being like, here's the formula, people times services times whatever the fuck equals carbon, you know, the stuff the plants need for the earth. Well, we need to take that away. Like, for some reason, we've convinced ourselves suffocating the plant life is how to save the earth. We'll set that aside. So if you know basic algebra, we got to get one of these numbers down to 0 or as close as possible. Well, the number on that, obviously, because it's all based off of people times services times... So either we can just have people and no one can do nothing and we just all, you know, be in some Matrix-esque cryo chamber plugged into the Borg, or we can get rid of all the people. But for people that are so concerned about, oh, the rising sea levels, well, they buy a lot of beachfront property. For someone who's so concerned about the resources and all, Bill Gates is buying a lot of farmland. I mean, so you can't blame these people like Brianna Joy Gray and everyone else for kind of being hypocrites because they're just sort of repeating the hypocritical points of the cathedral, where it's believe one thing and in every other way act in opposition to it. Lip service one way, actions the opposite way. And we'll get into a great point on that. So, this very idea of, is it wrong to have kids or not? How many kids does Ted Turner have? He's one of these big eugenicists wanting to minimize the population. You show me a millionaire or a billionaire that isn't pushing climate change. And then ask yourselves why all the people who constantly want to point to the millionaires and billionaires as the problem have all the same priorities and list of things to do as the millionaires and billionaires. So that's just one of the many aspects. I mean, basically what this sort of, I wouldn't say far left, but basically the socialist left sort of brand, I mean, it really just is like useful idiots for the millionaires and billionaires. They can't act against the millionaires and billionaires because they have the exact same priorities as the millionaires and billionaires. So they are just the grassroots movement pushing for everything the millionaires and billionaires are already in position to make more money off of. I mean, it's a great scam. Great scam, But these, all the people I've laid out who I think are really great people are being played as suckers. And that's the issue I take. So here's another good one. All of these people who want healthcare for all, okay, that's great. Well, that's compartmentalized with the, St. Anthony Fauci, which the debunked conspiracy theory of the past year or more, which is now appropriate to question. Oh, did the coronavirus, the Wuhan bat coronavirus, did it happen to come from the Wuhan virology lab that, during the Obama years, all the scientists said, why are we doing this? Something bad will happen. And our government said, okay, we'll stop doing it here. And then they just sent all that work off to China. And you have Anthony Fauci doing these, St. Anthony Fauci doing these interviews where he's like, wow, it's really awful that Rand Paul is asking me these questions about the research we didn't do in the Wuhan lab because, yeah, we sent them boatloads of money and we didn't really keep a good eye on what they were doing, but they probably maybe didn't do gain-of-function research, even though the grants we were giving them were for gain-of-function research, but there's no chance anything happened at all, but maybe it's possible. Okay. And it just so happens that the people that are the most implicated in this problem are the ones we're going to have do the independent investigation. But healthcare for all. Yes, because this is the system we all should be a part of. The system that the healthiest people I know, I work in health and wellness, I have my education is in nutrition. The healthiest people I know, you could not pay them to be a part of the healthcare system. They don't want insurance. The people I know that go decades without a fucking sniffle want no part of your system. So here's the better point. People can be healthy without health care. Because the reality of it is, medical malpractice is the third largest killer in the country. So, if I was a lefty, which I once was, so there are some parts of me where I can make the case. Well, if there was a corporation that was putting out a car and they somehow talked the government into giving them liability protection. So that means you get into an accident and your seatbelt didn't stay in, it popped right out, the fucking airbag didn't go off, and you just shot face first through that fucking front window. Well, the car company can say, not on us. Sorry, not our issue. We're protected. Do you think anyone would buy that car? Probably not. Now, do you think people would go online, take pictures of themselves buying that car, and encouraging everyone they know to buy that car? That sounds crazy, doesn't it? Right? But what if I told you the experimental COVID-19 vaccine that because we put hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and any sort of treatment out of question, those are all beyond the pale. That's like a lab leak. It's debunked. Well, because there's no viable treatments, because we debunked it all, we have to have emergency authorization. You can only get emergency authorization if there is no treatment. So that's why hydroxychloroquine was so important, because if there was a bad reaction from hydroxychloroquine, there could be a lawsuit. If there's a bad reaction from a COVID-19 vaccine, no lawsuit. So, we now have the evil billionaire pharmaceutical companies with experimental products. Essentially, states are extorting people into getting them. Private businesses are now acting as if they get to have a say into your healthcare and your medical treatments. Jobs are telling people, you need this medical treatment to work here. I mean, there are layers and layers and layers of illegality and civil rights and human rights violations, Nuremberg Code violations, and all these people cares about bringing more people into this. And they call themselves the fucking left? What? What? You are working for Big Pharma because you're that dumb. So there's that whole issue of giant billionaire corporations having liability protection, experimenting on people without any fear for repercussion. The people that caused this problem in the first place are the same ones that get to investigate themselves. I mean, medical malpractice being the third biggest killer in the country, and these people just want everyone roped into this mess. And the funniest part is, people like me that were opposed to Obamacare, where I said, listen, I like the idea because of how old I was at the time. I like the idea of it extending my healthcare treatment out a couple years because I was able to get treatment for an opioid problem I had in my early 20s and all that. But everyone knew that it would come to this. That once we have the socialized medicine system, they get to just start saying, okay, well, now we decide you need this treatment. And mind you, this is all over an illness with a 98% recovery rate. This is nothing more, COVID-19 is nothing more than the corporate rebranding of the flu. Name brand viruses for name brand treatments, name brand vaccines. Why, I mean, have you ever heard so much debate of, oh, well, is your medication name brand or this name brand that or this? But now we have, oh, are you Johnson & Johnson or are you AstraZeneca? Ooh, so elitist. I mean, Law and Order's doing episodes about vaccine smuggling, trying to make it seem like it's fucking this some sort of gold, like on the level of like human trafficking and heroin and vaccines for viruses with 98% recovery rate. I mean, it's insane. And you can tell how insane it is and how little science or actual thinking there is, because I know people that got COVID-19, fought it off, and then a month later somehow think they need a vaccine for a virus they were able to fight off themselves and have the antibodies for. So there's not a whole lot of science going on. But I mean, again, like I said, just look at any of the issues. None of it adds up. None of it has any bit of bearing on reality or anything that could be any bit useful in any which way. So, I mean, those are here. All right, and let me bring it back to the $15 minimum wage. Everyone kept saying $15 minimum wage, $15 minimum wage, and I had a really funny conversation with my mom a few weeks ago, and she was complaining about the lack of service she received at a Walmart. And I just sort of laughed and giggled through her whole list of complaints. And she said, what's so funny? And I said, well, this is like how when people come to me complaining about how there was a fuck up on their $2 burger at McDonald's. And you people don't seem to grasp it, that you are basing everything on minimums. So if you want a minimum wage job, get ready for minimum amount of concern, minimum amount of service, minimum amount, and you can't expect that you are going to pay someone the legal minimum and receive anything above what they consider that worth. I mean, I think about that all the time. I'm working for how much an hour? How much can I get for that an hour? Oh, it's only worth this? Well, then why am I working as if this is going to make an impact on something? But it's, again, because it's all set by the minimum. So I explained this to her. And again, because she's so conditioned, probably like all the lefties I listed, she can't imagine a world without government intervening. I mean, she worked for the government, so she really can't imagine a world where there isn't a Congress filled of lawyers who became lawmakers. That should be the number one problem. That right there. Conflict of interest, much? Every bit of legislation you pass is more work for your law school buddies? I mean, this is lobbying beyond lobbying's wildest dreams. But again, let's not expect anyone to take issue with the overly obvious. So, all the lawyers who are now lawmakers, but, so she says, well, there should be a maximum wage. I said, how about there should be none? How about nothing? How about it's for employers and employees to negotiate? Because certain people have different circumstances. And now, interesting, because what just happened? Oh, well, you just had a bunch of jobs say, well, we just had to double our wages because no one would work for less. So businesses are upping their wages. The government didn't do anything. They didn't increase the minimum wage or anything like that. People just took it upon themselves to say, I'm not working for that. And all that was all it took. So you can rally and do all your grassroots movements and force the 15 and whatever, but sometimes all of that's doing is spinning your wheels. Because sometimes government isn't the answer. I would argue none of the time is the government the answer. The answer should always be set outside of it. And that's one of the other things I say about this whole socialist thing. Isn't it interesting that under a capitalist framework, you can have socialist structures, co-ops, communes, communist structures, all of that can function under a capitalist society, but it never lasts long because eventually the grass is always greener on the other side. But under a socialist system or a communist system, you never really have little bits of capitalism pop up. I mean, yeah, maybe bartering and trading between one or another, but all the power is funneled into the state. So it just can't be. Like, there's too much force, too much coercion. You have people like me that I don't want a fucking part of any of your bullshit. That's all there is to it. I just want my own little farm. I'll grow my own little food. I'll live off my land. I'll make my music. If anyone wants to listen to it, they can listen to it. And other than that, fuck off. That's all there is to it. Like I said, the healthy people I know don't want any part of your insurance system anyway. So, but that's the whole problem. Because with this whole insurance scam, and any form of insurance is a scam if you ask me. I mean, fuck you lefties. Let's start talking about the rules of the road and how, in order to get us all to sign on to driver's licenses, I mean, you ever ask yourself why all your government documents, your name is in capitals, even though you never write it that way? Who writes their names in all capital letters? Oh, corporations do. So why is your driver's license a license for a corporation and not a person? Just a rabbit hole you might want to look into if you're all into this corporate corruption stuff. You are a corporation. They tricked you into acknowledging yourself as a corporation. And that's how all of this shit goes on. That's the actual oppression, because there's two sets of rules. There's rules for people and there's rules for corporations. How is Hillary Clinton above the law? How is everyone else above the law? How are... Easy. They know the game. They know when they're acting as a corporation. They know when they're acting as a person. Everyone else acts as a corporation all the time when they think they're being treated as a person. You can't fee, fine, or tax a person. You can fee, fine, and tax a corporation. You can't fee, fine, and arrest or pull anyone over if they're a person on the road. But corporations using the roads for commercial purposes can be pulled over, can be taken out of their car. It's why they say don't say anything, because you don't know the legal fucking game you're in. I love this stuff because there's all sorts of water language and maritime admiralty stuff, and it's all hidden in the words we use. It's why, there's a basketball court and there's a courtroom, and you're constantly going from both sides of it. I mean, a lot of this sounds like the sort of dismissive prison logic that people get into when they've got locked up and they come out super knowledgeable of certain things, and some of it's just quirky bullshit. But there is some truth to a lot of the maritime admiralty laws. Cash is a liquid asset. It's kept at the bank, as in the river bank. Cash flow, water flows. I mean, it's liquidating your assets. I mean, it's all there. It's just right there. It's all water laws. You're in hot water. It's bail. When you're arrested, someone needs to bail you out, like you bail out a boat. It all has to do with water laws. So anyway, Now I'm just ranting. I wanted to make my point at the left, but I hope that last little tangent I went on gives them something legitimate to work on and to look at and to realize, like, your problems and your solutions are not relevant to now and definitely not relevant to the future. I asked someone in their comments who thought I was trolling, as I said, well, what are Marx's, what are Marx's positions on AI, cryptocurrency, and, like, I said something else, and it's like, yeah, that's the day and age we're living in. AI, automation, and cryptocurrency. How's your Marxism factor those in? It doesn't. So it's not relevant anymore. Marxism is to economics what Darwinism is to biology. It was a cute theory for its time. It no longer has any bearing on anything. And for anyone who hears me say that Darwinism thing is like, what is he talking about? Yes, I'm a super smart monkey. No, you're not. We do enough genetic engineering now. They've had geneticists, biologists, and mathematicians all look at it and say, no, no chance in hell. Not with what we know now. Little changes over time, microevolution, yeah, that's true. This macro shit where one day there's a squirrel and then the squirrel grows wings and then it starts to fly and turns into a peacock, and then the peacock loses its wings and ends up standing right and turning into a cheetah. That's some fairy tale fucking bullshit. There's no fossil record over it, but that's trust the science. So, I mean, again, it's so outdated. Everyone still believes it. They still talk about it. I saw Sam Harris on a podcast recently going on about it, and it's like, isn't this guy one of the dark web intellectuals of our time? Oh, just it's so intellectual, talking 100-year-old theories that are no longer relevant and no bearing on anything. And that's how these lefties are with politics. This is not the day and age for that nonsense. You're teaching a history class and trying to make it relevant to now, and it's just not. It's not going to work. And it's so old and outdated that there's no way the people in power and control aren't going to retain power and control, because they're 10 steps beyond you. They know what day it is. You don't.